right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you very much for everybody for an amazing level of interest. We had 300 people wanting to come. We had to turn away a lot, and for those of you who were able to make it out in the rain, we appreciate you being here. We have a stellar lineup of panelists, all Web3 leaders, builders, and are ready to cooperate and work to build the next iteration of decentralized applications on Web3 with you. So, for a brief introduction, I'm Sam Yilmaz, a general partner of Blockseller ABC. I started out as an entrepreneur myself in Web3. Before it was a cool thing to do, did a token sale, built it on Mastercoin, if there's anybody in the audience who remembers what that was. 2014 was a good heyday for that. So thereafter, I ran an angel investment network, seeding many of the unicorns in the space, and a fund that raised all of its crypto, all of the funds in crypto, investing in decentralized applications. And since 2018, we've been investing out of Blockseller. Kate and myself as the general partners, and we have a few of our venture partners in the room, and also Richard in the panel. So without further ado, I'd love to pass the microphone to our panelists for a quick introduction on their backgrounds.
Hi, my name is John Wu. I'm president of Ava Labs, the team behind Avalanche, and very pleased to see a lot of people who are actually building on top of Avalanche today. My background, very quickly, is I was first a professional investor. I came from the investment management side, but I've been a 3-time entrepreneur, 2 times as a founder. I started my own investment firm, so that's a different type of founder. But then I did a Web2 company, even though it serviced Web3. I say it's Web2 because it had a business model that's more of a Web2, but it would touch the Web3 ecosystems. And then lastly, I'm president of Ava Labs. Although I'm not the founder, even been Sear is the founder, I was on the early team.
Cool. Awesome. I'm Richard Ma, so I'm the CEO and founder of Quantstamp. Started the company about 5 years ago. And before starting Quantstamp, I used to be a quant and a high-frequency trader on Wall Street, trading hundreds of millions of dollars a day, and sort of brought a lot of my software expertise to secure smart contracts. So today, we secure like more than half of the value in DeFi, it's really fun and appreciate it.
Hi, my name is Lucas Vogelsang. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Centrifuge. Maybe my background is this is the 3rd venture-backed company I started, or actually, second, 2 companies, 1 project, so third project. I worked 10 years in Web2, and for the last 5 years sort of got into Web3. So I have always been working as a founder, basically.
My name is Sid Powell, so I'm the co-founder and CEO of Maple Finance. So we're a lending protocol focused on institutional borrowers and lenders. Prior to founding Maple, I came from a banking background. So I used to work in the Australian banking sector, and then I was running treasury at a fintech company.
Hey everyone, I'm just excited to be here. Hopefully you are too. So my name is Michael. I started my, as far as I can remember, my life as a software engineer, and I went really deep in open source. So contributing to all the crazy projects back in the earlier 2000s, like Linux container stuff and Node.js and Python stuff, and I worked on web standards, and I wrote this protocol called WebSocket, which is sort of how. Basically how Gmail can work, or Google Docs can work, or Twitter, or things like that. I got into entrepreneurship in gaming, and I had a long journey there with a couple of venture-backed companies, and it led me now to my current, fairly recent entry into Web3, which takes sort of the form of 1.25 founder roles. So my main job is founder of Storyverse, and we are a fiction metaverse. So writers can write fiction in the metaverse. And then I sort of am a part-time founder of a company called WorkDAO, which does like really complicated sort of HR and tax things for tokens. So I get to sit on literally the total opposite ends of Web3, from the deep degen NFT stuff and then sort of like regulatory compliance for workers.
Great. So thank you very much for the brief intros, everybody. Really, the goal is to share scar tissue, share insights. We're all looking to build in Web3, and Web3 comes with a unique set of challenges that regularly, maybe as a Web2 founder, you don't, or there's a significant enough of a different flavor, you might as well call it by a different name. And so we ran a survey in everybody who RSVP'd, and 3 things stood out as key shared pain points. One was legal and compliance, shared by 90-some% of our founder cohort. Next was product and market fit. And the last was recruiting at some 65% hit rate. So really wanted to go into what the audience wanted to hear and share insights on those particular points. So let's start with product and market fit. So in your experience, how did you understand of the problem of the product market fit, and what was the approach that you took? Any insights you'd like to share?
So I think it's important to highlight what I think difference between Web3 and Web2, because to me, Web3 is not just the next innovative step in technology, but it's also a philosophy that you have to really embrace. It's decentralized and it's open, so you can have developers. When I look at what I do on a daily basis, yes, I'm president of all the labs, so I have a core team that I lead and manage and hopefully give purpose and a vision. But I'm also a leader for a greater community. I also have to have outreach and continuously engage. Otherwise, you're not going to have a permissionless / decentralized strong ecosystem. And in terms of how that translates into product market fit, the hard part right now is traditional Web2 companies run on existing rails. So people find a problem and then they create a solution. That's very simple. And the method with what you do that to get your customers after you have that is you go raise money from VCs and then you hire people to go do sales and marketing and to get customers, and hopefully, so it's almost indirect. The big difference here is the product market fit process in Web3 is not just find a problem, it's also you're interacting with the community, and that's very important here. You're doing literally build, ship, listen, fix, build, ship, iterative. And you're constantly improving it because it's not just what your core team thinks is necessary, but you have to listen to the community. The community are not just, it's one stakeholder in some sense. They're the users, they're the developers, they're the investors, they're even governance. Whereas in traditional equity world, they're all different people. So you have to service that. And to do that, basically the process for building a product becomes not very comfortable with a lot of people. It's literally build, ship, fix, listen, and very iterative.
Yeah, any order, doesn't matter. You don't have to go in a straight line.
Yeah, and just to John's point, like we see this a lot with the companies that start new ideas in Web3. Like they'll go to some hackathon and be like, okay, like this is a really cool prototype. And sometimes they make the same mistake that Web2 founders make, which is they like go away for a really long time, like make a product in stealth, and they're like, okay, cool, we have this really cool product now. Now we're gonna ship it. Like it's been 6 or 9 months, and then they ship it, and it's like crickets because they didn't get this like consensus amongst the rest of the community that like this is something that's interesting. And in the Web3 community, there's like a lot of social signaling that's also happening, like much more than Web2. And so, I think like this community product market fit is definitely like way much more like the important thing. And just to give an example, Notion, that was a product where they, Web 2 product, where they just like went away for a really long time. Like the whole team moved to Kyoto and just like hacked away for like a year and a half in Kyoto, completely in stealth. And they came out and they had this really cool product, and then people just started using it. And like the equivalent of like Notion, which is like sort of, maybe it's like Mirror or one of these other apps, they did like a lot more community building early on. And so I think the founding team, they have to also have some DNA of this, like how do you do marketing to this community?
I mean, like you're trying to get to build in an ecosystem. I think the point that you made about like you're kind of like the border between community, employee, shareholder, that it's all much more muddy. And also I think it's not just that, it's also actually how your product works and how it interacts within the greater ecosystem is actually also not muddy, but it's an integral part of crypto, that like you're not just building by yourself actually, right? Like DeFi in particular, the reason it became so successful was actually because of the ERC20 token. What did the ERC20 token give us? It gave us one interface that everything could be designed by and built into, right? And now you can have actually like 100 completely different teams building products that all work with the ERC20 token. So, and then that means they all become composable, right? So that now you can actually lever, you can borrow, you can trade, you can hedge, you can do everything as long as you do it in this standard. I think that's like open blockchains, open networks. Like this is what you want. Like you want to build a product that actually fits into this ecosystem, not just like go off on your own and try to build something.
Yeah, echoing what Lucas and Richard said. So I think you can't build in a vacuum. You have to always be kind of course correcting. And this means go out early, try and talk to your customers. Never build something in stealth. Like Notion might have been successful, they're probably the exception. The number of people I see building in stealth, who if they just had a conversation early on, you could have said, well, this team is already building that. Maybe you should go talk to them. Or they totally missed some things that were really obvious to people outside of their core team. Second thing is you have to find a niche. So successful products find a niche. It's like evolution or an ecosystem. And there's tons of different aspects to a workflow. So when we started, people were saying, well, Aave's already doing lending, so there's not room left in that product segment. But if you understand the nuances, there's actually a ton of different products. You just have to find a wedge where you can get started. And so this could be in exchanges, could be in lending, could be in any other product. But if you understand it deeply enough, you can find a wedge where you can get started and then build out from there. But it's very difficult to see that there's just going to be one kind of incumbent winner in any segment.
I feel sort of obligated now to talk about this because we went down the line. I got nothing to add then.
That's perfectly fine. So speaking of this, building to the wedge, I know, Lucas, you had a prior thought about trying to break the larger problem into smaller bits and shipping things that will stay alive and that will later work together. And do you want to speak to that briefly?
I mean, it's like the challenge with building in crypto is like you can't screw up, right? Like you need to actually build a product that is safe, because if you don't do that, then you will get hacked. And the consequences are usually pretty bad, right? And so in a way, like you almost want to like go into your lab and build for 6 months and then release something, or build for 12 months and then release something, but you can't because, well, we know, I guess, like it's crickets happen, right? So I think what you should do, and this is, I mean, how we approach it, is like we've, from the very beginning, like said, okay, we're going to split this up, we're going to release a first version, but we're already thinking on how we build the next thing, and we make sure that we can actually build on top. And then you do have to go through auditing every couple of months, or every 6 to 12 months. I think now in the lab we've done four audits, 4 major releases, but it's all building on top, but like, still kind of like smaller, like solving incrementally like bigger problems, but starting somewhere. And I think that was like a way that we actually managed to kind of like build out this whole like real world asset like infrastructure from like the very beginning to where we are today.
Yeah, sounds great.
Michael's just-
If any of you have anything to add, feel free to do that. We are unfortunately at a shortage of microphones, so there's a little microphone passing dance going on.
What was the question again?
The question is, how do you go about finding your product market fit was the original question. And then within that, we said, okay, we have to listen to the community, be iterative. And then the last point was, you can be iterative, but also do micro blocks so that certain blocks remain and retain integrity when you go and build something else that will plug well into it.
The other thing
Pay
is just,
attention, that's good.
I do.
the other thing is I think just find like one killer app or feature as part of your product. So you'll have, if you have a founding vision, you'll have 10 different things you want to do, but probably one of them is going to have the most impact, and you just got to land that one so that you can then get to, as Lucas said, V2 and V3 beyond that. But if you push out version 1 and nobody finds that one killer part of why they should be using it, it's difficult to survive long enough to get to version 2.
I can, oh, go ahead.
Michael's.
I saw it move, sorry.
I feel appreciated. I would say there's this sort of like rule that I'm trying to I'm trying to create, but like halfway there, I feel like you want the most learning with like the least sort of, you know, on the chain implementation. Meaning, if you can learn something without actually like writing a smart contract, then that's what you should do in almost all cases. And there's so many interesting and creative ways to learn from your community or from customers, right? And when you think about it, like, is there a way I could validate this, like without writing code, which is already, I think, a good idea in like Web 2 or whatever, you know, everything else is called. But it's like even more of a good idea, I think, in Web 3 because I'm the sort of person who sort of makes up, you know, sort of output in terms of volume. Like I just have a lot of ideas, and then it's sort of like maybe there's a good one in there. And if you're like me, where just like every idea isn't great, then being able to validate it without actually like running a smart contract is really, really helpful. And then you don't even need to pay Richard to like audit your smart contract, right?
Yeah, and just to Michael's point.
And wait 6 months to get someone to audit it.
But yeah, I think I can also talk to the B2B aspect of like finding the wedge, right?
There's just so much demand for it, guys. Come on, chill.
So like the B2B aspect, like what we found, whenever we try to basically make a new product, the thing that was really helpful for me is also before I like tell our guys to go like build something, we actually try to sell it first. So before, because I'm an engineer by training, so I would immediately think about how do I like build this, and then like most of our team is engineers, right? So we're like, okay, like let's do this, and then you know like 2 days later we have a plan for how to build it. And then over time, like the last 5 years of running this company, I realized actually it's much better to try to sell it first and get somebody to pay you. You know, like even if, you know, it's like $250,000 or some large number where it's not just because they're your friends. It's like meaningful to them, right? And then if they're willing to pay you, then it makes much more sense to go and like build this additional product because. Kind of like Michael, I'm also a guy that has like lots of ideas constantly. And if I got our guys to build all these ideas, well, that's going to be a very unfocused company. So that's how I like sort of now prioritize in terms of.
And when you do that, what's really cool is that most people don't truly have empathy with their customers' pain. Not really, like you kind of do, but like your customers, obviously, like they're the ones feeling the pain. You know, it's like. You talk to a doctor, do they really, really feel the pain of a broken leg? Like they get it, but they don't really feel it. And when you talk to your customers and you start putting a price tag on it, that's when you start to realize exactly how painful is this problem. And when you try to sell it first, when you're not thinking about like the inputs kind of like, what does it take to build it? This is, of course, B2B kind of advice, right? But you start trying, like, to Richard's point, like, well, if you're my friend, you'd buy this from me for 20K, but how about 250K, right? And then they're like, yeah, okay. You're like, wait, did I ask for too little? And you ask the next person, what about 500K, right? And at some point you start to realize, oh my gosh, this is like a real problem, like much more than you initially anticipated.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thanks for all the insights. Checking to see if I'm still paying attention.
Sam, make sure you get the microphone because we have recording and your voice is not going to.
Okay, sounds great. Well, thanks everyone for wonderful insights. So one of the other domains I want to sort of steer this product market fit conversation is towards finding your chain. So we have those of you who have already we'll get there. Some of you have launched a token. Some of you don't have a token yet. Some of you have already retired a token. Would love to know what went into thinking about token and your chain.
So obviously, I think everyone here should be developing on Avalanche.
Absolutely.
And if you do develop on Avalanche, I can give Richard a call, and you won't have to wait 6 months, and he'll do it immediately. I've done that many times, and that's kind of the service you get at Avalanche.
Or if you receive investment from Blockcelerate, then we can also accelerate.
But when I was talking to some of our dApp builders on our chain, and I think, I've taken the straw poll of not every single, but a lot of the dApps that come and build on it, and I always ask why and reasons, and there's like 4 or 5 reasons really. The first is the underlying chain has certain speed, scale, and cost advantages that they like a lot. Also, it's Ethereum compatible. All of that is good. Another thing that they are starting to appreciate is, especially with the subnet construct, is they're getting their own execution environment and they're getting tools to allow them to develop things easier. They also want a community. And luckily, our business development team and our marketing team have created a nice community so that ultimately they can make money. That's very important. Now, a lot of layer 1s out there actually give money and grants and all of that. Avalanche does the same thing, but reality is that is the least response, the lowest number of responses I've asked when I asked the developers. It's because everyone in this space, at least until some point, maybe April of 2022, had a lot of money. So that is the common thing from all the first layers who want to give grants or invest in companies. It's really the other 3 or 4 things. So, and also being able to get their security audit within 6 months.
Anybody who has contemplated migrating your chains, maybe you could speak to, or any clients migrating. I'm happy to hear from you if you have any insights on how to think about identifying or relocating your chain.
So we started Centrifuge in end of 2017, beginning 18. At the time, like people thought about, okay, how do we scale Ethereum? There wasn't much else at the time. People were really bullish on what at the time was known as Plasma. I don't think that went anywhere, although actually there's still some familiar faces around from that time. But the other 2 things that people were building, not the only, there's also EOS and a bunch of stuff I'm not going to mention now, but like the 2 big ones we looked at that are kind of like the big ICOs of 2017 that came out of the Ethereum ecosystem were Cosmos and Polkadot. Ultimately for us, we decided in 2019 that we do need our own execution layer, that we want to specialize in certain types of transactions, that with EVM actually we are not able to get that, and we want to, or with much more work. And so we started looking at actually building a dedicated Rust-based runtime with Substrate. Today we're like very close to launching our main product on Substrate. So we've been kind of like working within the Ethereum ecosystem and the Substrate ecosystem for like quite a few years now. The interesting thing is like ultimately, a lot of these layer ones are kind of like converging towards a similar architecture. I kind of like, it reminds me of what MySQL looked at, or what SQL was like 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Right, like at Microsoft SQL, you had Oracle-like SQL, you had MySQL, you had Postgres, and it's sort of a similar architecture. So in the end, I believe like we're not at a point where we've found a layer one that is like the winner. And we're actually, the technology is still so immature that I would say you'd be hard pressed to find which one's the right one. So when you do pick one, I think you want to go where there's a community and relevant users for you to start building with, because without that, really, it's hard to, I think, even like build a product, because you're going to be trying to pull people into whatever it is that you're building on, which it just makes it all harder. Now, of course, Ethereum has a big advantage, but I think there's quite a few other like chains that can do have really interesting communities, and including Avalanche, that we're also working with.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.
So we did multi-chain. So we didn't go and migrate from one chain to another, but Maple's built on Ethereum. So we went naturally there first because we had the highest confidence that we would find users. So you want to go somewhere where you know you have an end market. But then we went multi-chain when we actually acqui-hired a team on Solana. So they were basically doing the same thing that Maple was. And we found them through our network. And at the time, what attracted us to going onto that chain was it had a vibrant ecosystem. We were kind of the view at the time that it was like Uber not going into China. So we thought we were going to miss the boat, miss a rising market, and just kind of sacrifice territory that we didn't need to. So we made the decision to acqui-hire that team. We've launched on Solana, but how we think about it now, like the problems that came with being on multi-chain were access. So it was pretty late, it was late maybe in the last couple of months that Fireblocks supported Solana DeFi. And so for us, that was a limitation where we couldn't actually access the clients in the way that we wanted. So they had to use Ledger or other hardware devices to actually access the protocol. So think about who's going to use your product on the chain and make sure that market is there. Think about the access. So if you need people to be using stablecoins, is there this access to stablecoins there? Can people deposit and actually access your protocol? And then are you going to be able to find the developer talent? So you want to make sure that you can source people who can actually build on that chain. So it was very tough, and this was one of the reasons we did the acqui-hire, very tough to find Rust engineers who could build on Solana. So rather than staffing out our own team, it was actually easier just to find one who already had an idea of how the protocol should work and just work them into what we did.
Wonderful. Mike, did you have anything to add to that, or should we move on to the
A very small thing. So with Storyverse, which is our fiction metaverse, we're bringing NFTs to life. And the question is well, where are NFTs, right? And it's a very tough question to answer because they're clearly on ETH, but maybe they're on Solana, maybe they're somewhere else. And so it's obviously kind of a multi-chain thing, right? We want all NFTs to be brought to life in beautiful stories. But there's a limit of your engineering team. It's what are they going to do first? It's no matter how many you want to do, there's an order that you got to choose, at some level. But then there's this kind of problem that's worth thinking about from a strategy perspective. If you go on one chain and it works, then there's going to be 20 startups that are oh, we're going to be Storyverse for Solana. We're going to be Storyverse, for Polkadot or whatever, right? So if you intend to be on all these chains, I think there's this kind of hedging you can do where actually do the hard work of actually planning out what could be the process of going from one chain to the next chain to the next chain. Then go meet those people and share your plans with them. Let them try to convince you to change your priority order, because sometimes they're right and you should prioritize one over another. And maybe there's all sorts of incentives beyond the money, right? Health and things like that, marketing. But by doing that work, you may actually preclude them from choosing a different winner. Because someone went to them and said, oh, well, Storyverse is not working with you. Why don't we, go build Storyverse for Polkadot? And then suddenly they get all kind of the oxygen in that room. And then who knows, if you made the wrong bet, which I mean, frankly, it's, no offense, it's really hard to know, like, what to bet on. I mean, it's just really hard. I don't know anyone knows. And if you accidentally made the wrong bet, you might lose just based on like the chain you chose, and like that would be a tragedy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. So moving on, because there are two other really interesting topics that came up, and I'd love to hear our panelists' insights on that. Let's quickly cover team building and recruiting. What makes Web3 team building and governance around it unique? What are some of the challenges that took a lot of time to figure out? What insights can you have?
So team building always starts with the hiring process, and that's the first step, and some would say the most important step. Avalanche or Ava Labs had a slightly unique situation. Eamon Gunsir was a professor at Cornell University in the engineering department. He and two PhD students of his created the Avalanche consensus protocol. And we probably have 60 out of 200 people from Cornell because he just kind of uplifted a whole bunch of his students, and suddenly we have 50 engineers. I was also an undergrad there. That's how I know Gun. Gun and I were the first blockchain club advisors. We kind of helped start that in 2016-17. So again, because of that, we have even more Cornell people. So it was an unfair advantage to begin with. But the next group of people that we went after and I went after, I looked for people that I thought had what I call a T structure and capability. So no matter what function you're doing, whether it's marketing, product, or whatever, I appreciate someone who is deep, like they know the marketing funnel, whatever. They can do a job that very, very well. And that's a framework for them on how to do things. But certain people are very stubborn, and that's all they're willing to do. I purposely ask questions to see how flexible, because this is an iterative process. Can they take what they know about marketing and build community? So that's the T part. Can they horizontally take their skills to other things, because this space is so new, and how you do each of these functions are slightly different in Web3 versus Web2.
Yeah, just to follow on his point about like the T structure. I think for like a lot of founders, when they first start companies, they think like, okay, like for each role, there's sort of a magic bullet for that role. Like, and with the exception of a few hires, like for example, maybe like Ava Labs getting John, like most of the time, there's like no magical bullet, right? Like, you think, okay, if I just hire this one marketing person, all of our marketing problems will solve. Or like, oh, if we just get this like one really good engineer, our whole backend issues will be solved. And like when I first started the company, that's how I thought of things. And over time, what I realized is actually the people that stayed on and became really great at Quantstamp, they sort of like, they were able to move into some adjacent things. And over time, what I started to instead do was basically just keep a running list of all the things like I want to make inside of Quantstamp better, and just try people out for those things. And so like, that's sort of like how I interview for now. So if I have like an engineer and I'm like, okay, like it would be great if we can give more technical talks, or it would be great if we can organize some cool hackathons. Like, nobody interviews for engineer role to like host hackathons. So that's how I sort of like try to figure it out. And when they first join the job, after they like do their initial job pretty well, I'll just try them on these different things. And it like really forms a much better company, because people aren't just like so stuck to what their job description is, right? Because inside of each company, there's just like lots of random tasks that fall in between people's roles. And if everybody just does their own thing, all those things don't get done, and then the whole team suffers. So yeah.
Are those extracurriculars though? Or are those like core responsibilities?
I think basically it's like this T thing. So they have their core responsibility, and then there's like enough people sort of filling in for each other that your company is still like running well. And then you're like, okay, well, if like this engineer is spending like 30% of the time organizing events, I gotta hire somebody for that, and then sort of move things around.
I think that you kind of I had to catch myself a few times, like saying, oh, like actually there's no magic bullet for this role, like, or just adding another person, or finding this person doesn't solve all your problems. So I do think that's quite an important point, that you like realize at some point, like, yeah, like, but the sooner you realize, actually the better, right? Like, in Web3, like we're like, obviously there's a huge fight for talent, and you're kind of like trying to differentiate yourself. And what we've been doing, what we did really well at with hiring for us was we pick people that actually have a strong connection to what we're doing and care about it. Because if you're a software engineer and you can work at, well, you can probably, like, if you know Solidity today, you can probably get 30 job offers in a month. Right, and so like, what do you do? It's not just that you're like trying to compete for every other like company that's hiring out there. You're also like, in the long term, right? Like, you need to make sure that people care about it and do what they want to do. And I think it is, so kind of like making that a big part of the interview, I think is super helpful, because then you get, when you look for people who care about what you're doing, you get people that will stick around and draw from that passion for what you're building, and kind of like build a really good foundation. And that's, I think, I mean, for us, it's kind of like real world assets, like solving like problems for the people that are underbanked, for like kind of like solving, right, so much of what's wrong. For others, maybe it's just like building the fastest blockchain out there. For others, it's like just being crazy creative and like going, like buying NFTs in the middle of the night and like having really fun, like with like dogs and whatever else. Like, cats, actually maybe cats. I'm really not an NFT person, so I'd be a terrible hire for you.
I think when you start out, so anyone who's starting out in a venture, your first couple hires are really critical. So you want to find people who can do everything relatively unassisted. So a good way to tactically find them is to start with a recruiter early on, because you're going to be relatively unknown. So job postings will largely fall on deaf ears. Once you get past those first few hires, you can start to build teams around them. But those people, you always have to give like clear direction and keep reaffirming what the vision is, what they should be focused on, try and give them context on what the overall goal or objective of whatever project they're working on is. And then as you start to scale, you need to think about how people are going to work together, because early on, everything will come up to you if you're founding something, and you'll have to resolve all the problems but give everyone the context. As you grow, you want them to start solving their problems together, which means giving them clear responsibilities or a clear separation, so that they don't each think that the other person is taking their job or taking things that they should be working on. As we've evolved, we've started to use things like, which I think is a really good tactic, but use like a vision statement or a mission statement of what you think that project or that team should be doing. Because then it becomes really clear if somebody reads that who's not in that team, this is, marketing's job, or this is how marketing supports sales. So it takes an investment of time, but it makes your team way more effective. And it also gives people a lot more satisfaction in their job, because they don't feel like they're being either micromanaged, or they don't feel like if you give them feedback that they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, that is unfair, or what they were being asked to do was outside their role. That was a lot, but yeah.
Well, I like this question because it falls into this bucket of like 99% of all business questions I get that have the same answer. And it's sort of like work backwards, which is, why are you hiring these people, right? And ultimately it's because you want them to be happy, and productive, and to help you on a journey create like great value, right? So whether you're asking like, how do we make our SaaS business better, or like, how do I make my social game better, or how do I make my company better, or my dating life better, or whatever, it's like retention. It's always retention. How are you going to hold on to people? And actually it's interesting, because if you think about like, well, once we have a team, like why are they staying here? And I ran into this, sort of unexpectedly, like a super like OG kind of crypto, a guy who's got a great, like unicorn company, and And I was just so impressed where like he was talking about his company when it had like 0% churn of like, you know, Web3 contract engineers across like 6 or 7 years. And when we're asking about like how do you hire, he starts with talking about his churn, right? And then he talks about sort of all of the dynamics of the culture and sort of what he does to hold on to people and how anyone of his team could go like start a new company. And so he sort of makes sure that like they have that same creative outlet at the company. And I think if you start on that side, then it's almost like you don't have to worry about the recruiting side because it sort of like sells itself. It's just like really easy because people can just see how great it is to work there. So anyway, the answer to all of your problems is always retention. You can quote me on that.
Yeah. Noted. Well, thanks a lot. So moving on to the juiciest of the content, I suppose, the one that had the most hits, 90-some plus hit rate on our founders poll, compliance. So yes, it's gray, yes, it's shot, yes, there are self-appeasing individuals claiming certain things fall under their jurisdiction. How do we approach the matter at hand with a sense of responsibility and a healthy approach and building in compliance with whatever rules you think might apply to you?
No one wants to take this.
Yeah, I'll take this one. And a very circumspect question. So I think a lot of people spend a huge amount of resources and brain cycles up front when they're trying to found something on the legal question. And the answer is it's actually very flexible. So if you go to 5 different law firms and talk to 5 different partners, they'll actually give you 5 different answers on what is or isn't a security, how your product relates to existing laws on financial products, money transmission, all that kind of stuff. And we found that because we've had multiple law firms, and they'll give differing opinions. But then when we've gone with clients, and they have their own law firms, they give differing opinions on the same issues as well. So the answer is, if you're sitting there thinking, I've spoke to this law firm and now I have to totally change my product, maybe you actually just need to change your law firm. In seriousness, I wouldn't spend a ton of time totally reorienting your business based on the opinion of one firm until you've spoken to 2 or 3. And then the type of law firm that you want to work with, because often you'll stick with the first one because you don't really know what you're doing when it comes to the legal questions, is get a second opinion from somebody who's not actually working for you and not trying to pitch you business on how good that firm is. Ask for clients who've worked with them before. But then the type of firm or the type of relationship you want is where you want to give them a business objective, and then they tell you how you can do that. What are the risks and trade-offs? They don't just tell you yes or no, because that's a very binary outcome that doesn't really help you run your business.
So, well, thank you for that.
I have a lot to say about compliance because my 0.25 job is this worked out thing where it's like the question for the company is how can we help dozens and hopefully soon hundreds of clients and customers comply with like every single labor and tax law in every single country like simultaneously. And so if we start with that as like the mission statement, you can imagine it's like very, very, very quick that you sort of fall into this seeming quagmire. And what's interesting is like compliance always feels like this sort of like U-shaped curve where you start out thinking like, oh yeah, I kind of have an idea the world works, like we're probably not a security or whatever it is. And as you like learn more, you just become like less and less certain. and like the first law firm and the second law firm and the third, you're sort of becoming like less and less certain. And then you get kind of the other end of this U-shaped curve. And I think everybody goes on this journey. I just think it's sort of par for the course if you're in this industry. That you finally come out at the other side, you get back above water, and you start to have some conviction and confidence. And I definitely watched many customers of Worked Out and Worked Out Self go through that journey kind of as a board member, and so I got to tag along myself. But the one thing I would say is that I don't believe that compliance can be put on sort of autopilot and sort of outsourced. Unless it's labor, in which case you can talk to that guy Ken over there and he'll do all of your labor compliance. But in general, I think there's an obligation for the early team. It doesn't necessarily have to be the founding team or the CEO, but like the early executive team. There has to be someone who's willing to be like the owner. And you can never just like do what your law firm tells you. That's sort of maybe the corollary to this. It's like, you know, you're running your company, or you know, your team is running your company. So you can't just do what the law firm says. You have to have your own kind of opinion, but obviously you're paying them lots of money to like learn what they have to say. And so it's a balance, and so it means somebody on the team has to have ownership. And every single like failed project I've seen because of like compliance, I don't mean like the dramatic kind where the SEC shows up. I mean like they just like never, I mean that's a different story, but they just never get it out the door. It's because it's so easy to like not have your own opinion and like not move forward unless there's someone on your team who owns it. So if you look around and you're wondering like, oh, well, you know, I don't know anything about compliance, like whose job is it? If you don't see that person, then it's probably your job. So like either go hire that person or like become that person is my only advice.
I think they both Sid and Michael said something very important. Combining those two gives you even better results. I agree with Sid, you need to go interview a lot of different law firms, and I agree with Michael, you need to have your own opinion. But I will reverse the order. You have to know who you are first. Life's just a lot easier for whatever you're doing if you know who you are and what you're about. First question you ask yourself is, am I a company that wants to go break things and ask for permission? Or am I a company that wants to ask for forgiveness? Or are you a company that wants to ask for forgiveness? And then you go around and interview a lot of lawyers and figure out which one fits who you are.
I think there was more to the Freudian slip there.
You said forgiveness twice, in case you were wondering.
And also, when you ask for forgiveness, you might still be asking for permission, because regulation by enforcement is a fact, and so I think there was more merit to what you said there.
Well, it's called like a negotiated forgiveness settlement, I think.
Yeah, I think the asking for forgiveness and asking for permission is sort of a pretty good approach for crypto, right? Because, you know, if you ask for permission, you're basically not going to launch anything, because I think we're all probably the owners of the compliance stuff on this panel, right? It sort of ends up being the the CEO or the COO or the president that decides these things. For most products in crypto, whether that's like launching a DeFi project or launching a coin and having US investors, or listing it on Binance.
I think
or
having
FTX,
investors, you have token holders, not investors.
Having token holders, right? So all of these things, the lawyers will give you varying opinions, and then there's sort of, it's on the risk spectrum. And then the other problem is that in crypto, there's always like other competitors that will try to like move pretty quick. So, in the deliberation of what to do, someone else can already be, making those moves. It's sort of this balance.
You want to tell us about your story of permission forgiveness, or save that for the networking?
Yeah, maybe yeah.
Sounds great.
I'm basically like a legal clerk at this point, so.
I think actually, not so much just about regulation, but like working with lawyers in general is like, don't ask a lawyer how, but like go to them with what you want to do. And ask them, okay, how can you help me? Can we do this? Tell me how we can do this. If you go to a lawyer and ask them, okay, how can I launch a token? Like, they're gonna probably take you on a very expensive roundabout way tour of every single law that you can find. If you go to a lawyer and you say, look, like this is the token, here's how it should work, this is what we're planning on doing. Tell us where we take were there any potential issues with securities law, or like are we good, right? Where are we potentially breaking other laws that we are not aware of? Like, tell us, and we want to obviously do the best thing possible, but like this is the way you should work with any lawyer, whether it's about tokens or contract negotiations or anything else, right? Like don't ask an open question.
Lucas's point is really good. It's like, if you go in saying like, how can I do something? It's like your life's ahead of you. You're never gonna get there. Don't make it binary. Don't be like, oh, how? Like say, here's what. Like it's exactly your point. Like here's my outcome, and then the key question is, what is your advice on the best possible way to mitigate risk if I were to do this? And if you ask it like that, then what you're going to get back is like, oh yeah, like here's the playbook, and this should reduce your chance of going to jail from 90 to 40. And you're like, wait a second, maybe that's not the path I want, right? But you basically get the advice you want, and sometimes they'll come back with creative solutions. And so it's almost like, don't even ask your lawyer for permission, ask them for risk mitigation.
Listen to these founders for you guys starting out. These people have opinions. They're high conviction people.
Indeed.
Well, how are we doing on time? I think it's about the time to wrap up.
4 minutes for questions.
Great, let's open it up for questions. We had a 3-pillar that came up to the top, but happy to hear from you. Let me give our shortage of microphones and share it in the family.
Daniel, would you mind passing it to whoever raises their hand?
No, that's good.
This is your big opportunity, guys. Come on.
Don't be shy.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm John Tehiro from Zen Ledger. We simplify crypto taxes with software. The question for the panel is, in today's market with a lot more volatility, economic risk, uncertainty, fear, how do you market? How do you get your brand out there and make sure that you're speaking to the right kind of customer or potential customer?
Any thoughts?
Go ahead, Sid.
Yeah, I think you should do your competitive market analysis, work out who your ideal customer is, and then the key find points that make you stand out as a product or a service for that customer. So, like we do lending, but there's a very specific market we want to go towards. So it's like, are you retail or are you institutional? Within institutional, you got to fragment the market again and then work out what's important to those people. And then you want to find out where they are. So how do you reach them? Sometimes you could have cold outreach, warm introductions. You could attend events like this. You could also do paid advertising. There's any number of channels, but you got to choose your channel for that audience, and then you got to work out what's going to be most effective to get the kind of decision making that you want. Is your sales process that you get them on a call, or is it that they just automatically subscribe after they go to your website, and it's like a self-service thing. So yeah, so just playing that back, so you got to work out who your right audience is, where they hang out, what the right channel is for them, and then you orient your organization around that. So it's like, will you have inbound or outbound sales team? Thanks.
Go ahead.
All of those are great, and then for a layer 1, you have an additional channel, which is your community, and those are your influencers, and those are your biggest sales and marketing people. So for layer 1s, you have to also think about that channel.
Great.
But the bear market is good, by the way. Like if people use your product now, they'll probably also use it when the price goes up, right?
We have one question for that.
I can just. I guess my question is regarding like in this bear market, how is your perspective on capital formation and like managing your balance sheet, especially if you have a liquid token, you want to get capital from investors, or there's already like a proactively traded market. What are you guys thinking in terms of like what assets you're holding and how do you manage that, especially given that we're in a bear market? And if you want to do raises, like how do you do them?
Plan against payroll first and foremost, because people buy their lattes like with some kind of fiat usually, not with the tokens. But everything else I think is up to the project.
I would I mean, I want to emphasize this. So we started. I got into crypto in 2017. Then, right, like winter hit in 2018. I saw a lot of projects disappear because they looked at their ETH balance sheet go from 2,000 to 200, and that was meant also that their maybe 10-year runway went down from 10 years to 1 year, right? And you don't want to do that. So I also think, as much as I kind of like look back at this and say, oh, maybe I should have been a bit more of a degen with maybe my own time and maybe also like some of our treasury. We've actually never done that, and I think that I would still say that's very much probably when you're trying to build, the highest leverage thing you can do is not try to like manage your money, but like actually build. So like we've always had a very like hands-off, like, I mean, we invest in some like very safe, stable stuff, but not like trying to speculate on token prices. And I mean, especially in this market now, this obviously makes sense, but I think also like in the past it has made a lot of sense because you kind of like forget about what you're really trying to build when you get too lost in like allocating your treasury or whatnot.
Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Louis. I would love to ask a question. And so we're builders from Stacks, and Stacks is actually a small ecosystem, right? If I'm gonna put you in our scenario, so for example, we're currently doing like our seed round as founders, but then if you're coming from like a small ecosystem such as Stacks, usually VC will not take a look at it because they're gonna do different kinds of frameworks such as like, is the chain EVM compatible? And then Stacks doesn't fall on that bucket, and it's harder for teams building on Bitcoin to actually raise money. The question is, what will you do if you were in our scenario that you're trying to do a different bet and build on Bitcoin, but then it's harder to raise because all of the money that's capital is flowing is actually on Ethereum and other EVM chains that are actually, you know, that's the question. It's like, what would you do in our scenario? Should we move to Ethereum? Forgot Bitcoin?
No, so you got to look at break down the ecosystem you operate in, right? So you're in Stacks. Stacks is built on Bitcoin. There are certain incubators like Trust Machines who will offer grants because they have a vested interest to see, you know, the ecosystem of Stacks develop and the number of people participating. So Bitcoin still has the largest market cap by all cryptocurrencies, right? So you want to find people who are wanting to see that appreciated because a vibrant ecosystem develops there. So look at the people. So one, identify the strategic players on the Stacks ecosystem. So Trust Machines is the only one I know, so I'm going to keep repeating that. And then find out who invested in that and who sits behind it, and then get them to make introductions.
I was an ex-employee on Stacks. Now I'm building on Stacks.
But yeah, you should either like increase your conviction or like decrease your conviction. I think you're just like at the wrong level of conviction, right? Well, like if you had more conviction, I think you could raise money from anyone.
That's true.
And if you had less conviction, you just moved to Ethereum.
Well,
Good advice.
I think the market is also providing a signal. So, you know, it's like having conviction is one thing, but having conviction and being correct is like important. And so, you know, it's also good to talk to John. He's already here. But I do think the market is providing a signal. Stacks has been out for a long time, right? But there are like Bitcoin-focused VCs. There's like Castle Island. There's Anthony Popolino. There's some, but yeah. It also does depend on how easy it is to port your app, because earlier we were talking about multi-chain, and so if you have a co-founder or team members that just really want to build on Bitcoin, you could also just do this multi-chain thing, and then you can look at the different traction, and it's more like A/B testing chains.
Is your project something that already exists on another chain? Like, are you building the Uniswap of Stacks?
I'm doing hardware, so
okay.
Yeah, but it's gonna start on Stacks, so yeah, it's harder for hardware. It's hard for a reason.
Then we have
Yeah.
another question here.
Sure, we'll take it. I also want to be respectful of our panelists' time.
Go ahead.
Thank you for your great advice, everyone. I'm Prabhat. I'm the founder of Super Club. We're Web3's first super app. So we have socials, communities, and dApps, all natively integrated on a decentralized platform. So trying to build a 10 cent in Web3. My question is, if you're someone like Lucas or Michael and you're super accomplished, you've done 3 companies, there's always an A16Z who's willing to fund you for $50 million to build out the idea and take a super long time to reach product market fit as we understand the ecosystem. What is more important, getting to the exact product market fit, which is itself a spectrum, or surviving and chipping away with your product while the market comes up, or you figure out the right sort of solution?
If you have to choose between VC funding or product market fit, forget about the VC funding. Product market fit is the hardest thing in the entire world. There's VCs, no offense to the folks in the room, but I don't know, money kind of grows on trees, once you have product market fit. And so the thing that surprises most people is they think that money is a meaningful input into building something that people want, and that is occasionally, very occasionally true. And I think Elon Musk is a good example of that. And so, let him build sort of rocket ships and electric vehicles where he's got to start with the money. But for everyone else, just focus on your product market fit, and everything else will take care of itself for sure.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate each and every one of you for being here. We're very much in favor of supporting our founders, and it was your kindness and generosity of spirit to also share your insights with current and future founders of Web3. So thank you again, and let's start with the networking tab.